when magic still held sway on the lives of people, there was a great forest in Wales, a vast expanse of trees and undergrowth. And most people kept their distance from that great forest. It was said to be the land of the Tylwyth Teg, owned by the fair folk of Wales. There were some who had ventured into that great forest, and very few had returned. So most people just kept their distance. But in the middle of that great forest, there lived a man called Arwell, a woodsman. And he lived there quite happily with his family, with his wife Olwyn and his young daughter Angharad. You see, Arwell and his family, they understood the forest. They respected it. They knew its ways. They knew that when the sun set, the forest belonged to the Tylwyth Teg, and you had better make sure that you were safe indoors. And their cabin afforded them all the protection they needed. Of course, this meant they seldom had any visitors, but that suited them just fine. Well, one autumn, the cold came quickly and early. The leaves on the trees had already fallen, even though it was just mid-October. And in the middle of the night, Arwell, Olwyn and Angharad were tucked up in bed in the sleeping loft up in the rafters of their cabin, when in the darkness there came a sound. 3 long, slow, steady knocks. Arwell got up, and Olwyn reached over, grabbed hold of his wrist, said, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to get the door," he said. "You fool, you don't know what's out there." And so they waited in the darkness to see what would happen. "Look, they're not going away," he said. And with that, he lit a candle, climbed down the ladder, and went to the door. And he opened that door and stood just outside with 3 small people. He knew at once that they were Tylwyth Teg, but Arwell was shocked. Although he had seen their secret circles, their secret paths in the forest, he had never seen a Tylwyth Teg before. And here were 3 of them on his doorstep. And as he looked at them, unsure what to say, the tallest of them spoke up and said, "Good evening to you, Arwell. We were wondering, it's a very cold night and we are having trouble with our fire. Could we come in and warm ourselves by your fire?" Well, Arwell wasn't really sure what to say, so he opened the door and let them in. And they huddled around the fire in that cabin, warming themselves, as now Olwyn came down the ladder. Standing beside her husband, she said, "Would you care for some food?" "Oh, that would be very nice," they said. And so Olwyn prepared some food for them and poured each of them a drink. And now Angharad came down and clung to her mother's side, wondering who these strange people were. Hungrily, they ate away at the food given to them. And then Arwell remembered something he had been told. You see, with the Tylwyth Teg, you could never be certain if they were there to help you or to trick you. And he knew it was always good to keep on their good side. "You said you had had trouble with your fire?" "Yes," they nodded. Well, I make charcoal. You are welcome to a bag if you'd like." And with that, all 3 of them beamed great big toothy grins. And when they had finished eating, Arwell gave them a bag of charcoal. And then the taller one dug into his pocket and pulled out a great big shining gold coin and placed it in Arwell's hands. And with that, they went on their way. The following night, the same thing. The same 3 Tulwith Teg. After food, refreshment, warmth, they came in, they ate. Arwell gave them a bag of charcoal, and in exchange they gave him a bright golden coin. Night after night this happened, and eventually Arwell and his family were getting a little bit tired of their sleep being interrupted, so they just began to leave food on the table and a bag of charcoal, and in the morning, more often than not, they would wake up, find the food and charcoal gone, and a great shining coin on the table. It wasn't every night, but it was a frequent occurrence. Well, winter was coming now. Rolling in, the cold, eventually the snow, and the forest was blanketed in a wonderful coating of snow. It was the week before Christmas, and Angharad was beside herself, because in the week before Christmas she got to do the thing that she looked forward to all year. Arwell would take her out into the forest, and they would go collecting evergreens, holly, to decorate the cabin. And they trudged out through that crisp white snow, further and further away from the cabin, until it was nowhere in sight. And as they walked through the forest, a fresh fall of snow began, great big snowflakes coming down. And I don't know how many of you out there will relate to this, but Angharad, she looked up into the sky, she opened her mouth, and tried to catch snowflakes upon her tongue. And as she stood there in that fashion, she saw something high up in one of the tallest oak trees. "Dad," she said, "look!" And Arwell looked up and saw that his daughter was pointing to a great big clump of mistletoe growing high up in the oak tree's branches. "Can we have some, Dad? Oh, please, can we have some?" It was a big tree. The branches were icy. But Arwell looked at his daughter's face, and how could he say no? "Fine," he said, "I'll try." And with that, he scrabbled up the trunk, and then using the branches, step by careful step, climbed higher and higher into that great bare oak tree. The snow had coated the branches. It had melted and then refrozen, and the branches were slippery underfoot. Still higher he climbed. Higher, the branches getting smaller, and now the mistletoe was in reach. And he reached out, just out of reach, and as he leaned forward, his foot slipped, and he fell. Down, down, until he hit the ground. Where Arwell fell, he landed on a wind-fallen branch. The jagged end stuck into his back. He tried to put on a brave face, tried not to show the pain in front of his daughter. But Angharad could tell it was bad. And by the time she had helped her father back to the cabin, he was whiter than the snow that they walked upon. Quickly, Olwen set to work. She prepared some rags, some water. She cleansed the wound, packed it the best that she could, and tried to make her husband comfortable. There was no way a doctor was going to come to them out here, and by now Arwell was too weak to walk. They were on their own. The days passed. Arwell did not get better. He got worse. And so instead of decorating the cabin and looking forward to Christmas. By the time Christmas Eve came, the cabin was dark. No decorations, no food prepared. The only light came from the fire, the orange glow shining off Angharad and Olwyn's faces as they sat beside Arwell. By now he was in a fever, and with every breath his chest rattled. And as they sat there in the silence, in the far, far distance, they heard a sound. Olwyn tensed. The sound came again. It was getting closer. Olwyn reached down towards the fireside and she picked up an iron poker, grasped it solidly in her hand, and waited. Angharad didn't understand what was happening, but she knew this wasn't good. A strong wind began to blow through the trees, making them creak. A wind that grew stronger and stronger. The panes of glass began to rattle in the cabin, and then the snorting, snuffling sound of a snout sniffing under the door. Olwyn stood. Stay here, Angharad. No matter what happens, stay with your father. And with her knuckles white as she grasped that iron poker, Olwyn went to the door of the cabin, opened it, and went outside. And Angharad was shocked to suddenly hear her mother say in a very authoritative voice, "You cannot have him!" "Oh, but my dear," came a thin, croaking voice, "it won't be long now." Angharad could not resist. She crept closer to the open door, peered through the gap between the door and the hinges. Out there she saw her mother standing, brandishing the iron poker in front of her. In front of Olwyn there stood 6 white dogs, huge white dogs, their ears red as blood, their eyes burning like the embers of a fire, their teeth bared, drool dripping down to the floor. But that was not all. Behind those 6 white dogs were 4 coal-black horses, and those coal-black horses were attached to a chariot, and in that chariot stood a woman. Well, I say a woman. She resembled a woman. Her hair, jet black, it moved in the air as if in water. Her eyes burned with a blue fire. And now Angharad realised it was Maltanos. The dogs were the hounds of Annwn. And then Angharad's mother spoke again. "He is not dead yet." "Oh, but my dear, he will be mine." Once again, Olwyn repeated, "You cannot have him." "Well, I tell you what, my dear, why don't you come along as well?" And with that, Maltanos brought her hands together in front of her, and the Cwnanwn, the hounds of Annwn, were unleashed. 3 of them set upon Olwyn. She swung the poker this way and that, landing a few blows, but the hounds were too strong. They overpowered her, dragged her to the ground, carried her across the snow to Maltanos, and Angharad saw Maltanos reach down and pick up her mother. But then the other 3 rushed for the cabin. Through the open door they grabbed hold of Arwell. Angharad threw herself over her father, screaming at them to let go. But the hounds, they only had one mistress, Maltanos. and they began to drag Arwell out of the cabin. Angharad grabbed onto her father's ankles, desperately trying to pull him back in, but now she too was dragged outside. Maltanos rose up into the air upon her chariot, carrying away Angharad's mother. The Cwnanwn rose up after their mistress, carrying away Arwell, and Angharad felt her feet lift from the ground, but she could not hold on. Her fingers slipped. She fell to the ground. She watched as her father and mother were carried away, but Angharad would not be stopped. She ran. She ran, following the sound of those dogs, following Maltanos's cries. She ran through the forest, not caring where she was going, trudging through deep snowdrifts, branches whipping in her face. She found a path that twisted this way and that, but she followed it. Wherever that sound was, she followed it, until she burst through the trees and found herself in a great, wide, open clearing. Covered in snow, she looked up into the inky black sky, dotted with stars, a great full moon. But there was no sign of Maltanos, no sign of the Cwnanwn, or her mother and father. She collapsed to the ground, the biting cold of ice and snow soaking through her clothes, but she didn't care. She didn't know where she was or what to do. She sobbed. And as she cried, in the moonlight, at the edge of the clearing, in the depths of the shadows, she thought she saw movement. She believed it was the Cwnanwn, and so she called out, "Give them back!" From the shadows came not the Cwnanwn. From the shadows stepped a small man dressed in red, a staff in his hand, a long white beard to his chest. And as he stood there, he was joined either side by two similar small people, but these dressed in green, and then two beside them also dressed in green, 2 by 2. Each of them being joined until Angharad found herself surrounded by a great circle of Talbot Teg. And then the man in red spoke, and he said, "Give what back?" "My parents," she said. "My parents." She broke into a fresh flood of tears. And as she sat there, 3 of the Talbot Teg dressed in green stepped forward. They came to comfort her. And she looked up through those bleary, tear-filled eyes and recognized the faces of the 3 Talbot Teg who had been visiting her parents in the cabin. "Where were you?" she said. "Where were you? Can you help?" And instead of answering her, their eyes looked towards the man in red. Angharad followed their gaze, and the man in red approached. He said, "I am Gwynapnev, king of the Talbot Teg. Our laws are clear, child. Any human who steps inside our sacred circles will spend the rest of their lives serving the Talbot Teg." "How was I supposed to know?" she said. "It's supposed to be Christmas. Why can't it be Christmas? First Maltanos takes my mother, the Cwnanwn take my father, and now you want to make me a slave? And after everything my parents did to you, did for your people?" Gwynapnev looked to the other 3 Talbot Teg stood beside her, and they explained to their king the kindness and generosity shown to them by Angharad's parents. And then Angharad explained in more detail about how she came to find herself in the middle of their sacred circle. Gwynabnedd stroked his long white beard. "Well," he said, "our laws have stood for more than 1,000 years. I will not see them changed for you or anyone. However, seeing as your parents have shown respect, generosity to my people, then it is only fair that I repay the favour. There is something I can do, child, but be warned. If you enter into this bargain, your own life may be in danger." Angharad didn't hear that last part. All she heard was that there was a chance. There was a possibility that something could be done, and that was what she focused on. "What is it?" she said. "Anything. Tell me what I must do." "Ah, well," said Gwynabnedd, "through the magics I possess, I can have your parents returned to you. They will have no memory of what has happened to them, and you must not tell them. But the magic that I use will only last for the 12 days of Christmas. If you are to keep your parents, you must find some luck. Make your own luck, perhaps. Yes, that is what you should do." Angharad was confused. "I don't understand," she said. "Look, you are talking in riddles." "It is our way, child. Do you not know that? Now, listen closely. I will return your parents to you. And beware, if you are unable to solve the riddle I give you, then on the 12th night, Maltanos will ride forth once again to reclaim your parents and to take you as well. To stop this from happening, you must bring to me in this circle before 12th night something held by a tree, but it holds many trees, a sweet gall of springtime blossom and a friend of drunken pigs. It gave its name to Avalon and holds a star within its heart." Well, Angharad was about to ask him a question, but then there was a deep roll of thunder and a thick mist suddenly enveloped them. And as the mist began to clear, Angharad found herself back home in the cabin. To the left of her, her father in perfect health. To the right, her mother, and neither of them with any memory of what had happened. In fact, they were both very confused how it was now Christmas morning and there wasn't a single decoration hanging in the cabin and not a single bit of food prepared. Now, I'm sure many of you out there can imagine the distress of waking up on Christmas morning and finding such a situation. But Olwen, of course, like all good Welsh women, she took control. She got Angharad and Arwels getting to work, getting the cabin decorated. She set to work, and in next to no time, they had a feast fit for a king. And it was almost perfect that Christmas. Almost. If it was not for the fact that Angharad realised the clock was already ticking. Christmas Day was the first day of Christmas. She had a riddle to solve. She ran it over in her head again and again. Something held by a tree, but it holds many trees. What was the next part? A sweet gall of springtime blossom and a friend of drunken pigs. It gave its name to Avalon and holds a star within its heart. She had no idea. Boxing Day came, the second day of Christmas, still no idea. The third, fourth, fifth day of Christmas passed. Now she was starting to stress. She was desperate to ask her parents if they might know, but Gwynabnedd had told her she was not to tell her parents anything. She knew She had been warned. To do so would break the bargain. She couldn't risk it. She had to solve this herself. The 7th, 8th, 9th day of Christmas passed. She stopped eating. She was off her food. She had to find an answer. She knew of Avalon. She had heard of Avalon, that magical land to which King Arthur had been taken. But well, what did that have to do with anything? 10th day of Christmas, the 11th day of Christmas, the 11th night came, and Angharad was beside herself. She couldn't sleep. She lay in bed trying to figure it out when from the door, but she got it wrong. But she miscounted. Was this the 12th night? No, she was sure this was the 11th. It had to be the 11th. As her father climbed down the ladder to the door, Angharad was terrified in case she was wrong. Was this 12th night? Her father opened the door, and there stood outside for the first time in a long while, with a 3 Tolworth Teg. "Good evening, Arwell." "Good evening to you," he said. And in they came, and Arwell began to sort out some food and some drink for them, and they said, "Oh, just some fruit tonight, Arwell." Okay. Arwell put a fruit bowl out for them, and they sat down at the kitchen table. Angharad was now down from the sleeping loft, and she sat down at the table opposite them, scowling at them. Why were they here? What were they up to? And they just looked back at her and smiled. And each of them lifted an apple from the fruit bowl, and they cut it in half. They were up to something. They were up to something. Why were they here? And Angharad noticed as each of them had cut the apple, they weren't eating. They had turned the cut ends towards her, and each of them was just tapping it with their finger. She looked for a moment and then looked back at them, and then she realised something had caught her eye. She looked back at the apple where they had cut it in half around its equator. Where the seeds were held, 5 little pockets that formed the shape of a star. A star within the heart of the apple. She ran the riddle back in her head. Something held by a tree. Well, an apple comes from a tree, yet it holds many trees. Well, the pips grow into trees. It holds many trees. A sweet gall, a springtime blossom. Well, the apple comes from the blossom, and a friend of drunken pigs. Well, it was obvious. Angharad knew that some of the pigs in the apple orchards, if they ate too many rotten apples, they would fall down drunk. It gave its name to Avalon, though. Oh, how could she be so stupid? Aval, the Welsh for apple. The Isle of Apples, Avalon. "That's it," she said. "What is?" said her parents. Time for bed." "Thank you," she mouthed to the Tolworth Teg, and ran up to her bed. She lay there, unable to sleep, until the grey dawn arrived. She slipped downstairs, put on her warmest clothes, grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, and headed out into the forest. She wasn't sure how to find the sacred circle again, but she just trusted, followed her nose, and soon she was following a twisting, turning path that felt familiar. And then she found a great open clearing where Gwynapnedd stood, waiting for her. "It's an apple," she said. And he smiled and said, "Yes, it is." And he took the apple from her. "This," he said, "represents wisdom, but it is also the guardian of the realms." And with that he pulled 3 sticks from his pocket. "These," he said, "represent the 3 rays of true inspiration. the awen, and with that he inserted them into the base of the apple like a tripod. And then he reached over to a nearby growing bush and plucked 3 sprigs of evergreen and inserted them into the top of the apple where the stalk grows. And he said, "These represent everlasting life." Then he muttered some words. "This," he said, "will bring you good luck, good fortune, and health. Place it in the window of your home, because more importantly, it will shield you from Maltanos." And with that, he disappeared before her very eyes. She ran back home. All the way she burst into the cabin, her parents wondering where she'd been. She thrust the apple with the sticks and the evergreen into her parents' hands and said, "It has to go in the window." Well, she seemed so adamant they didn't question. They just put it in the window and there it sat. As the 12th day of Christmas passed and the 12th night came, and Angharad was quiet and subdued, jumping at every breeze, every sound from the forest. But 12th night came and 12th night went, with no sign of Maltanos. Well, the following year, just to be on the safe side, Angharad made one of those apples herself, placed it in the window, and the next year, and the next year. And when she grew up, had a family of her own, left the forest and moved into one of the nearby villages, she continued to do the same. She would walk down the street, give them to friends, neighbours. And then eventually the friends and neighbours began to do a similar thing. And as time moved on, the tradition of Calennig grew up in Wales. A tradition which is rarely practiced today. But the Calennig apple remains a symbol of luck and good fortune, and was always passed out around midwinter. Specifically, it became associated with a New Year's tradition of Calennig. And so, eventually, every home in Wales at one time had a Calennig apple in their window, a gift from the Tylwyth Teg. And so ends my story. My hope that perhaps you will share this story and maybe we can rejuvenate the tradition of Calennig. But I thank you for joining me this evening, or indeed today, depending on where you are in the world listening to this story. Once again, may I remind you, please do go and visit beyondstorytime.com. Just have a look at what the service has to offer, and if you are interested, you can even buy a gift subscription for somebody for Christmas. If subscribing to that site is not for you, then by all means please do visit beyondtheborder.com and maybe consider giving a donation to help our next festival. But now, all that remains for me to say is thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed, and have yourselves a very peaceful, warm and safe Christmas and New Year.